Welcome to the Cows Report, episode 16. I'm Laura Keep of the Cows staff, filling in for Will Reese, who's under the weather this week. But we couldn't wait to launch this latest episode full of some timely information as things are changing nearly every day in the college football landscape. In the big interview, we're talking to Ross Dellenger, Yahoo Sports senior college football reporter. He shares his takes on some of the biggest issues shaping college football right now: the college football playoff, expansion, conference power, private equity, and the uncertainty around federal legislation like the SCORE Act. Ross talks with our own Ryan Bradley about the decisions being made right now, the debates happening behind the scenes, and what it all means moving forward. After that conversation, we head into the lobby. Brakston Brock, Associate Athletic Director for Development at Oklahoma State, leads this segment. He's joined by two senior leaders who just lived through major head football coach searches: Reid Sigmon, Deputy Athletic Director at Oklahoma State, and Rhett, Hobart, Deputy Athletic Director at Auburn. Together, they walk through what the hiring process really looks like today: the crowded coaching carousel, a compressed calendar, confidentiality, search firms, and the pressure to get it right. It's a candid conversation about leadership, process, and decision-making at the highest level. Let's get started.
It's time now for the big interview here on the Cows Report podcast. I'm Ryan Bradley, and I'm excited to be joined this month by the senior college football reporter for Yahoo Sports, Ross Dellenger. Ross, thanks for making time to be with us. How are you today?
Good, Ryan. Good to be on with you guys.
Excited to dive in with you. Lots to talk about. We'll start with a story you published this week about the coaching carousel and the college football playoff. You highlighted the 14 coaches, coordinators, head coaches, guys in senior positions on the 8 playoff teams that are directly impacted by this, having accepted other jobs and are juggling double duty. This, of course, is a byproduct of the lack of continuity between the football calendar and the academic calendar. You talk to a lot of people impacted by this. What are the biggest challenges they're facing, and what, if anything, can be done about it?
Yeah, well, it was fascinating to dig in to see how much the coaching carousel has impacted playoff teams. Like you said, 8 of the 12 have at least one coordinator, a coach, or senior position member that's taken another job. They're all still coaching through the playoffs, but they're also juggling their other job. You know, you think about Texas A&M and Oregon, both of their coordinators are turning over or, have taken another job. And 3 schools, one has a new head coach right now at Ole Miss, and 2 others, JMU and Tulane, have a head coach who's taken another job and doing sort of juggling both. At Ole Miss, you have 5 offensive assistants that already signed agreements with a rival school in LSU, but that are coaching through the playoff. Just really weird, but kind of bizarre. But when they expanded the playoff, we knew we would get some of this. There was going to be some consequences and unusual sort of things, and this was one of them, where you would have an impact on coaching staffs because of how accelerated and early the coaching cycle is happening. And it's happening for a number of reasons, but certainly, as you mentioned, the calendar is one where you have the early signing period and the transfer portal and the end of the season and all that coming within like a 6-week span. I think, I don't think there's a solution to it as long as major college football is tethered to an academic calendar because of when universities begin in early to mid-January with the next semester. I think it makes it hard for all the schools to align with a certain date that these things happen. Like you have more in the NFL when you have free agency, not happening in the middle of the playoffs, and a lot of coaching transition, at least on playoff teams, not happening in the middle of the playoffs. Now the NFL avoids that for another reason. It's because they have binding contracts, a collective bargaining agreement, all that stuff where that all gets pushed off to another time. So college has to deal with not just the academic calendar, but the fact that they don't have more binding contracts. Their contracts are written in a different way. A good example is a playoff team in the NFL has to give approval to another NFL team to talk to a coach, to interview a coach on that playoff team. And I think oftentimes you'll see an NFL team say, decline that request because they can do that because of the way the contracts are written and that they are all just sort of underneath this collective bargaining, sort of agreement. And college just doesn't have that, and it may have that eventually, but right now it doesn't, and it causes some issues with the calendar, which causes issues on playoff teams with coaching transactions, and not only drying coaching transactions, but all the other things that teams are dealing with in while preparing for a playoff game, signing a new class because the early signing periods in mid-December now. Um, Scouting portal players in preparation for the transfer portal window opening in January. Well, we all kind of know the portal is really open right now, right? Kids are getting in the portal. You have to prepare for that. And then retaining your current roster, re-signing players, all of it's happening at one time. And while these programs are preparing for a playoff game and preparing for bowl games, those who didn't make the playoff.
I know you spent some time talking to these coaches and even spent some time on the JMU campus earlier this week. What were your observations in terms of how this experiment seems to be working? And do you think the way it plays out for the teams that are most affected by this in the coming weeks in terms of who wins and who loses will impact how athletic directors and coaches think about the way they handle these transitions in the future?
Yeah. I wasn't in Harrisburg, but I wrote it like I was in Harrisburg. I had to put the reader there, Ryan. But it was just a couple hours from me. I've been wanting to get over there actually. This off season. I hope to make it over there and see the new coach, Billy Napier. Um, when I look at what decisions may be different going forward based on all of this, um, first of all, there's the NCAA Football Oversight Committee is stop me if you've heard this one before, working again on a holistic view of the 365-day football calendar with potential changes coming. This is probably at least the fourth time that they've sort of embarked on this in the last 5 years, I'd say. Um, this time feels different, maybe. They they're really going to study this thing and try to answer. Really, there's two or three questions I think they're trying to answer, two or three main questions, and that is one, um, the early signing period. Should it remain in mid-December, early mid-December, or should it move back and you eliminate it and it moves back to February or moves to January, or do you move it forward to July or August or even some kind of June? Some coaches have wanted it actually in June. So they're trying to, that's a big question. The other question is exactly when these playoff games will be played, in any kind of expanded playoff. That's a big question right now, as well. And we just we don't know the answer and might not for another month on an expanded playoff as the commissioners sort of are at an impasse right now with playoff expansion discussions. And I think there's going to be more talk about the portal too. And is the portal in the right date in January? So I think they're going to be answering all those things, the oversight as they kind of study this for the next several months. But when you're talking to coaches and talking to administrators, uh, you get the sense that something has to change about this, about the timing and the calendar of all this. I just don't know. Even if you make any changes, I just I don't know if it's really going to solve the issues because you're just always going to have players wanting to leave after the season. That's when they're going to want to leave. They're not going to want to stay. If they're going to leave, or coaches want them to leave, they're not going to wait 4 to 6 months for the spring semester to end to leave. And that's one of the issues in the fact that you have the academic calendar um, starting in January, sort of expedites all that. And I don't know, even with changes to the calendar, how much you can solve some of these problems.
You mentioned the college football playoff expansion. Let's talk a little bit about that. We're just 2 years into the current model, moving from 4 teams to 12 teams, and yet the controversy around who gets in and who gets left out is louder than ever. This year it's centered on Notre Dame and its exclusion and all the media hoopla afterwards, but you can add Vanderbilt, Texas, BYU, and the ACC champion being left out to that conversation as well. How much do these moments of inflection actually influence the decisions that are being made in the room and the tweaks that are on the horizon for the short-term, long-term future format of the college football playoff?
Yeah, I think a reason that the original deadline for them to decide if they were changing the format for next year was December 1. And I think one of the reasons that deadline was extended to late January through the championship game, when they meet annually, the presidents and the commissioners meet on the CFP governing boards, is because they wanted to see the not just the selections of this year's committee, but sort of how the games played out. I think that is important. Um, I think that the results of the games will impact the playoff conversation going forward. And that's why it is important. I just dropped a story writing a little bit writing about this, is that it's important that the ACC and the Big 12 and the non-power leagues win some of these games. You've got to start winning some of these games. And I know we're just it's just year 2, but last year that group, the ACC, Big 12, and the non-power leagues, were 0-4 against the Big 10 and SEC. They didn't win a single game. This year, ACC Miami plays A&M this weekend. JMU and Tulane play on the road, play Big 10 and SEC against Big 10 and SEC, and then Texas Tech will get a chance in the quarterfinal to potentially, for the Big 12, win a game. And I think it's really important that at some point somebody outside the Big 10 and SEC and Notre Dame win a playoff game, because I think it will inform the future playoff format discussions for sure. So right now, gosh, I could talk about this for hours, right? I try to dumb it down and be as quick as possible. Right now, the commissioners are sort of at an impasse because a year and a half ago, the 11 entities that make up the CFP, which are the 10 FBS conferences in Notre Dame, agreed in a memorandum of understanding on a 6-year extension with ESPN in themselves for the CFP to continue. And in that MOU, they agreed on a new revenue distribution model, which 58% of the money goes to 2 conferences, the Big 10 and SEC. But perhaps more important to people is the format, and the format authority for any future format was granted to the Big 10 and SEC. So they have to agree for any format to go forward and be adopted. So right now, they don't agree, right? The SEC wants more of a 16-team playoff, keeping with the current concepts, 5 automatic qualifiers for conference champions and 11 at large. And the Big 10 is supporting a larger expanded field with multiple automatic qualifiers for individual conferences. The latest one, because there's been many models, the latest one is 4 AQs each for the power conferences, 2 for the group of 5, and 6 at large, a 24-team bracket. And there's a model out there of a 28-team bracket. There's a 20-team bracket too. But those seem to be just don't have as much support in the room. It seems to be the last conversation they had, which they met last week in Las Vegas, was momentum for a 16 team bracket from the 10, and then the Big Ten still, I think, is sort of it's a hurdle. Like the Big Ten is presenting sort of a little bit of a hurdle because they haven't fully maybe dove into that theory. So that's all going on right now, and they have till January 23rd, I think, is the date to alert ESPN if they're going to change the format for next year. Well, there's a lot of other conversations happening and things happening around the CFP outside of that specific conversation. And one of them is, which I wrote about today, which is the MOU that was signed a year and a half ago. Even if the playoff doesn't expand next year, changes are coming. People just don't realize it because it's buried in an MOU that hasn't been released or really announced publicly. And there's 2 big changes in the MOU from a year and a half ago. One, Notre Dame gets a guarantee if it's ranked in the top 12 of a 12-team playoff, it gets an automatic berth into the playoff. Number 2, right now, under the current format, it's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. So no designation per league. It's just the 5 highest ranked conference champions, which is why this year you saw 2 group of 5 champions get in. And the ACC champion Duke was left out. Well, going forward in that MOU, the power conference champions, each one of them from the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, and ACC, are guaranteed in. So, for instance, this year, if you're using next year's rules for this year's playoff bracket, Duke is in the field instead of JMU because they're the ACC champion. And Miami is out of the field for Notre Dame because Notre Dame was ranked number 11 inside the top 12. So that's all going on, and there's plenty more I could talk about scheduling and all that stuff, but I'll be here for forever. But it's it's the single, probably, for I think fans and fans, I think it's the single most interesting thing right now is the future and the constant changing and discussion of the playoff format.
It's going to be fascinating to watch not only how the games unfold, but how the decisions unfold in the weeks that follow the college football playoff this year. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit for our Cal's audience and talk about another front burner issue for the industry insiders, and that's the emergence of these private equity deals. A couple of that have come to fruition after a lot of talk behind the scenes over the last couple of years. We now have private equity deals that have been announced with both Utah and the Big 12, and you've been all over both of these stories. So let's start with Utah's private equity model. How is it different than maybe some of the others that you've heard about and that we've read about, and what makes it unique in terms of what has allowed Utah to get to a place where they were ready to pull the trigger on this one?
Yeah, well, one way it's different, vastly different, is a lot of the deals you hear about in college athletics from the conference level and the school level are more like private capital deals, right? It's just an infusion of capital. There's not as much like equity involved. Utah's deal is an equity deal, straight up. They don't hide behind it. It's an equity deal. Otro Capital, the investment firm, is investing a large part of the upfront money that it's giving Utah is it purchasing this newly created outside of kind of the university athletic department that Utah is creating called Utah Brands and Entertainment LLC. And while Utah's foundation is going to preserve at least 51% of that entity, we don't know the exact numbers, but at least 51%. They have the majority. Utah does, but I think the equity firm is going to be, having a large piece of the rest of it, and has board members on the board that governs this new entity. The board is chaired by Mark Harlan, the athletic director, who, because they own majority of it, does have the decision-making powers and authority over everything. But that does scare a lot of people around college athletics, that 40 plus, 45 plus % of this new entity is owned by an outside firm. And is that worth it to take the capital? And the capital is a lot. They're thinking it will get upwards of $500 million. There's a little bit of like a misinterpretation there when I put out that story. The 500 plus million number is not, no, Otro Capital isn't giving Utah $500 million. They're giving Utah probably a couple $100 million. I never able to get the number. I think the number is kind of changing. That number, that 500 million, is Otro's capital investment of a couple $100 million or so, plus the investment that individual donors are making buying stakes in the new entity. So Utah has opened it up for donors to own a piece of the new entity. And so all of that accounts to this number that they're expecting from the deal. So it's an interesting deal. It's pretty fascinating. You know, we've seen a lot of schools, Kentucky, Michigan State, Clemson, create sort of outside entities of departments, sort of athletic departments, to run a lot of revenue pieces of the athletic department, moving revenue pieces from the athletic department that's underneath the university umbrella to outside, to this new entity that doesn't have to, go through the red tape that you normally have to, or hurdles that you normally have to get things approved and all that stuff from a public university. But what Utah's doing differently is obviously it's taking capital and allowing an outside firm to have a large piece of that entity. And obviously the question is like how you pay the capital money back in. It's how you pay anything back, right? Over several years, based on an increase in revenues, and probably based on dollars, an increase in dollars from the new Big 12's new television deal. So that's sort of the gist. And speaking of the Big 12, right, they're down the road too on their own sort of deal, and that's a capital deal. It's an exclusive capital deal. It's not equity at all. And it's just an infusion for the Kai's 3 buckets to the Big 12 deal that they're still working on, and not approved or finalized yet. But they're kind of 3 buckets. One, and it's with Redbird and Weatherford Capital. And so one bucket is sort of just a business relationship between Redbird Capital and Weatherford in the Big 12. And Redbird and Weatherford will work for the Big 12 to generate different sponsorships and all that stuff. So that's kind of one bucket that's probably the least interesting. The second is an infusion of capital into the Big 12 office, like into the headquarters, from Redbird and Weatherford. I've heard upwards of numbers of like 25 million into the Big 12 to reinvest in revenue generating entities, in creating maybe new businesses. We all heard about the Big Ten Capital deal, Big Ten Enterprises, maybe something similar to that. And then the third bucket is just access to capital for individual schools. It's an opt-in, opt-out. Schools have the option. They want to take capital from Redbird and Weatherford or not. And it's upwards. Each school can take upwards of 30 million. That again would be paid back presumably off of the Big 12's new TV deal when that happens in 4 or 5 years from now.
So we know these conversations have been going on in boardrooms and on Zoom calls for a long time now. We have these 2 that have gone public in a more formal way in the last couple of weeks. Do you see this as a tipping point? Are we about to see a whole lot more of this type of activity, or are these 2 really out further in front of everybody else in terms of their readiness to say it's green light time.
Yeah, I think you will see more. Yeah, I do. I anticipate maybe even not more, but being announced in a public way. But I think you'll have individual schools do more of this. And maybe it's not the equity type deal that Utah's doing. Maybe it's more of like the capital deal that the Big 12's doing. But I do sense that schools don't want to be at a financial disadvantage, which is why the Big 12 in a Big 12 school, Utah, is doing this deal. Let's be real. Like there's a gap of 20 plus $1 million between Big 12, a Big 12 school and a SEC or a Big 10 school. At least $20 million. It's going to stretch to probably 30 or $40 million in the next 2 or 3 years. So in order to close that gap, this is part of part of what they're trying to do by doing these deals. And I think the same can be said for ACC schools, right? To me, it wouldn't be surprised if in the next few months an ACC school does a similar type of capital deal.
Well, stay tuned for that. All right, you're based in D.C. and you've been all over the happenings on the Capitol Hill, or perhaps lack thereof in certain instances in terms of true movement. Let's talk about the SCORE Act for a minute. It almost made it to the House floor for a vote a couple of weeks ago. What are the core tensions right now in Congress and around this proposed legislation, and why has the progress stalled despite multiple proposals?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I spent 6 hours at the U.S. Capitol for no reason, so that was fun. They were supposed to vote on the SCORE Act. What's funny, I walked in the Capitol and I was greeted by another press person who's not college sports, probably didn't know what the SCORE Act was. But she'd heard about it and she'd heard enough to tell me, quote, Ross, that this isn't going to pass today, right? And I was like, what? Because that was news to me. And lo and behold, she was right. It got pulled off the floor for a vote. And clearly, there were some detractors who, at the last minute, the Republicans thought they had, and they did not. So you ask about why, right? Well, two conversations: why that specific one failed, and then where this thing is at now. Why that failed? Partly, Chip Roy is the Republican House member, one of them from Texas. He leads a group of House Republicans that listen to him, and he's against the SCORE Act. He sort of like Cody Campbell, the Texas Tech board member and Texas billionaire who's close to Donald Trump. They believe similar things, that the SCORE Act doesn't go far enough, and that more needs to be amended in the SCORE Act. And so really the bottom line is when he decided not to vote for it, and his group perhaps decided not to vote for it, they didn't have enough votes. Then they as being House Republican leadership, tried to go to the Congressional Black Caucus, who several members of the Black Caucus are in support of the SCORE Act. But as Democrats, they were not going to be the determining votes for it to pass. So as soon as the House Republican leadership did not have the votes, the Congressional Black Caucus and the Democrats were not going to save them. Right? If they had the votes, a few of them probably would jump on board, and we might see that. And so that's kind of what happened that day. So where is this at now? It was told to me then that it would be several weeks before it would come up again. And, we're 2 weeks from that, and we're about to hit the holidays, and they're about to go on break. And so we might be a few months now from this coming back up. There's going to allegedly be modifications and amendments to the bill. This will be the third time or so, well, maybe even the fourth or fifth time, really, that there's a stage of modification So I don't know how many modifications they can do of the bill until it sort of dies. If it keeps coming back up and fails, I don't know what they can do. I will say this: no matter what, even if the Score Act would pass, it was going to take once it got to the Senate, where it needs 60 votes, and there are 53 Republicans. So you need seven Democrats on the Senate to get past the 60 vote filibuster and pass anything. The Score Act wasn't going to get those seven. It wasn't going to get 60. It was going to fail in the Senate. But it was going to be a pretty big step in passing one chamber. And once it got to the Senate, it was probably going to be taken, modified, combined with some other bills. And maybe there's a chance in the Ted Cruz's committee that he oversees, that he chairs, the Senate Commerce, that something were to happen. And so that's kind of what the Senate is kind of waiting for, is for this bill to get to them and then start the ball rolling. But what might happen is they not wait for this bill to get to them, because it doesn't look like the bill might not get to them. So I think Ted Cruz, Marie Cantwell, the ranking member, the Democrat of the Senate Commerce, have been talking with a variety of other people, specifically Coons of Delaware on the Democratic side, the Indiana senator, his name is escaping me, on the Republican side, and they've been talking about trying to come to some bipartisan agreement. And you mentioned in your question what's stopping that, from happening, and there's a few things. I think one is oversight of college sports. I think the Republicans want the NCAA to have control, like it does now in the conferences, and the Democrats do not want that at all. They don't want the NCAA involved, and they don't really want the conferences involved at all. They want an outside entity or government oversight of college athletics. That's number one. Number two, the employment argument. College athlete employment. The Republicans in the Score Act, it deems college athletes as students and not employees, so it prohibits employment. Democrats, or at least a portion of Democrats, certainly Maria Cantwell, do not agree with that. That is something that they believe should be left to the courts to decide, and to athletes. I would say the third part is, the antitrust exemption, probably the biggest part of the bill. There's disagreements on to what depth do you give the NCAA and conferences legal protection to enforce their rules, like the house cap, compensation cap, player eligibility, transfer rules. How far do you go? How much power do you give them? And I think the Republicans, Ted Cruz and them, want to give them, this much power. And Marie Cantwell, the Democrats, probably want to give them this much power. As for those listening on audio, holding up my fingers far apart and small apart. And so those are the three issues. That's probably not what those listening want to hear, because those are the three biggest issues. And it's funny because Cruz and Cantwell, like about 3 weeks ago or so, met, and I asked some people who weren't in the meeting, but who were made aware of how the meeting went. Hey, how'd the meeting go? Right? I asked them. And it went really well. Good conversation. It was like a 2-hour talk. Oh, great. Great. But we disagree on some things. I was like, oh yeah, what is that? What do you disagree on? Well, employment, antitrust, and oversight. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, those are the three main parts of the bill. The fourth part is NIL state preemption, which they do agree on. Pop the champagne. But other than that, they still seem very far apart.
And then on the oversight part that college athletics can control, you've got the College Sports Commission, which you've also reported on extensively, and the participation agreement that the schools were asked to sign some time ago. And again, we've seen that same dance of one step forward, two steps back in terms of getting alignment across the autonomy conference schools. From your vantage point, how viable is the proposed structure that they have outlined for the CSC? And what does it reveal about where the industry is trying to go from a governance and alignment standpoint in terms of what they've outlined there?
When they were talking about the creation of the CSC last fall, basically about a year ago when it was really getting going, I think as they described it as, a new sort of body that the schools would be, voluntary members of, and would set rules and regulations and enforcement, and would have the power to do this and that. And as that was being described to me, I kind of said, well, this sounds like another NCAA. How is this different? And really, the only difference is it just involves the power conferences, instead of everybody else. Although to a degree it involves everybody else, but the decision making seems to be solely with the power conferences. And so as a year later, here we are, and lo and behold, the College Sports Commission is having similar issues as the NCAA has had. Exhibit a participation agreement that everybody kind of said in the power leagues that it would sign. Well, everybody's not signing. And if everybody doesn't sign it, which grants the CSC basically full control and enforcement, and schools waive their right to sue over enforcement, if that's not signed, there's going to be more legal challenges against the College Sports Commission. And the similar legal challenges that sort of have crippled the NCAA and its rules and regulations and its enforcement. So the same sort of stuff is already beginning to happen. And so to me, there are like three paths here. You get a congressional bill, which we just talked about, probably not happening anytime soon. You have everybody sign the CSC agreement and swear an oath they're going to play by the rules and not sue over enforcement. And that doesn't appear that it's going to happen anytime soon either. Or you collectively bargain. So that's kind of it. And that's where we are in college sports. I think, to go back to the CSC agreement, I think that there are modifications that are planned for it. And there's a hope that the modifications will lead to everybody's signature. Ryan, I'll believe it when I see it. And if enough modifications are made that everybody does sign, the agreement won't have any teeth. So I don't know what the point is. It's not the greatest place right now in college sports. But as somebody reminded me, the CSC participation agreement, I think Brian Seeley said this last week in Las Vegas, and I thought it was a really good analogy. He said the CSC agreement gives meat to the bone of the House settlement, but the bone's already there. Everybody agreed to the House settlement. All these conferences, everybody agreed. And the CSC was just like this extra step. But the fact that the leadership of college athletics thought that they needed to have a agreement that everybody signed to waive their right to sue tells you the doubt that they have in the House settlement working how they intend it to, which is everybody following the rules and it capping compensation. And we're already seeing it's just not working quite as intended. But I was talking to an SEC AD recently, and they said that, you're right, it's not working as intended and probably won't. But it's a step toward where we need to get to. It's a painful step toward where we need to get to. And everybody knows where that is. And it's the third option I mentioned earlier. It is collective bargaining. And you hear it talked about more and more and more. And I think that's probably the end of the road at some point.
It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out. Despite all of the challenges, we'll kick the games off this weekend. The stands will be full. The viewership will be through the roof. There's no doubt the excitement and interest in college football remains at an all-time high. Lots going on behind the scenes. And Ross, I know a lot of folks inside and outside the industry appreciate your in-depth reporting and analysis on these issues, and we'll continue to stay tuned to your platforms as we track alongside you as the issues continue to evolve. So appreciate you making time with us this month to dive in and give us a little bit more insight. I know you're really busy and will remain so in the coming weeks and months. So we wish you the best over the holidays, and thanks for making time for the Cows audience this month.
Yeah, Ryan, it's great to be on.
All right. Thank you, Ross.
Certainly a lot to unpack in that interview with Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports. Thanks to Ross and Ryan Bradley for this timely discussion. Next up, let's hang out in the lobby with Brakston Brock, Associate AD at Oklahoma State, Reid Sigmon, Deputy AD at Oklahoma State, and Rhett Hobart, Deputy AD at Auburn, as we learn more about what the search for a head football coach looks like in 2025.
All right, welcome in to the lobby segment of the Cows Report. I'm Brakston Brock, Associate AD of Development at Oklahoma State, here with Reid Sigmon, Deputy AD at Oklahoma State, and Rhett Hobart, Deputy AD at Auburn Athletics. What's going on, guys? How are y'all?
Afternoon.
Hello, Brakston.
Thanks for the time. I personally am very excited about this. Getting to ask some questions to some guys that have really had a big impact on my life and pick their brain on a few things. When Will and I talked about this segment, I think it's going to be pretty impactful for a lot of people at my level, as far as, in those in the industry that want to sit where you guys sit, and as far as kind of trying to understand the search process and what goes into that. You both, I'll start by saying congratulations. You both executed high-level searches this past cycle and look to have hired some really good coaches. So we'll go ahead and jump right into that. So let's talk a little bit about this year's cycle. At a time where we saw over a dozen Power 4 jobs open up, talk about your perspective in trying to navigate that with so many other ongoing searches, happening at the same time.
Well, I think you hear this a lot, but I do think it's true that every search is completely unique, and there's tons of factors that play into that, in the search and how it plays out, from timing, financials, what you're looking for to head coach, where your program is at that point. So I think in a lot of ways, you're kind of running your own race against yourself in some ways, as opposed to really everything in the market. But you also can't, with that in mind, keep your head in the sand to what's happening around you. I think each role in school has their own pros and cons. And no matter how crowded the market is, you can find a way to separate yourself in terms of what you're looking for specifically, if you know what you're selling and what you're looking for from the beginning of the search. It could be recruiting based, it could be the conference, part of the country, your financials, all those things. But maybe to answer your question further about this year specifically too, I really think this year the biggest challenge was truly more about calendar, the number of jobs open. You probably felt that too, Reid. The calendar of December and January, that almost 40-day window between signing day on December the 3rd, going into the transfer portals, really unlike anything we've ever seen before. Not to mention the CFP conference championships, all those pieces of what you're looking at as you're trying to interview a coach who maybe is involved in those conversations. So I really think that this cycle, it was more about the calendar than really the quantity of the jobs open. I don't know if you felt the same way, Reid.
No, I do. I think you've outlined all those things. Especially at the start of the process, you're really you've got to be focused on your process and your position, and what makes the most sense. As you get farther into the process, you are aware of where are the various pieces going to fall, or trying to maybe figure that out. But ultimately, you want the right person for your job, that wants to be in your job, and how that shakes out. But part of what drove us, we were able, and that was the plan at the start, we were able to build the process, and the goal was to have our coach determine prior to the end of the season, at least a piece of paper in the drawer, knowing that it's done, so that would be ready. Now it turned out we had to announce a little earlier than we were planning, but to Rhett's point, to be prepared and to be ready at that moment. The other thing that kind of happens is, as you go through the process, there are certain candidates you may be interested in, but other things may happen and their interests may change. And it's really truly finding the right pieces. And for us this time, as Rhett said, everything is unique. I've been in other searches that the timing hasn't quite worked out, but this time it did, based on the plan we had, and we were fortunate to get the candidate we wanted at the time we wanted.
Yeah. Absolutely. Reid, I'll come back to you on this one, because I know you and I have had a little bit of discussion of this on your end. As far as it seemed like, this year, more than most, maybe more outside the industry, there was more talk about engaging search firms in that process. So talk about, Reid, just because I know your experience of both using search firms and, conducting an independent search. Talk about, the things that they can help make you aware of, and areas that can help you, and just kind of navigating that process.
No, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing is really, again, process. Is how do you organize the process? How do you build a systematic way to get from the beginning to the end? And they do a great job with that. Everyone has their list, and your list, and their list, and how do you compare? But then building that process. A lot of it is logistics. It's dealing with the agents, setting up the Zoom calls, setting up in person, building schedule, those type things, and really helping you stay on task, so to speak. I mean, you're very focused on it, but you're also running an athletic department. So how to manage that time, and then to ask the tough questions, and to force you to have opinions on, all right, we've got to go from a larger number to what's our next cut to our next cut, and how we're going to figure that out. And then knowing again where all the agents are, and trying to figure out that process. I've been involved in searches with and without. The other thing that has changed over time, and really since COVID, is Zoom makes these things a lot different. Prior to COVID, it was phone calls and maybe more personal visits, and now you can kind of get through the process and more systematic. So I think that's it. And I think the ability to keep things as close to the vest as possible is something they also help out. So again, this year, and the firm we used, and everything went incredibly smoothly for us.
Rhett, do you see the same thing on your end as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think search firms provide incredible value in a process like this when you choose to employ them. To the point Reid made, they can have conversations and do things that the school and the university cannot do at the time of a search, that you're trying to keep things confidential and maintain the integrity of your search. They also, with often being involved in multiple searches at the same time, can give you some efficiencies, because they're having similar conversations across the country to know, who is truly movable and what conversations have been had. So you maybe can get things off the ground more quickly. I will tell you uniquely, this search, we actually did not use a firm on our side. I'm a big believer in search firms overall. We've used them on pretty much every other search we've done. Going into this, though, our AD, John, had a very specific process in mind he wanted to follow, time he wanted to follow, and candidate pool we were ready to go with. And we started moving so quickly that we just almost got ahead of ourselves in that process of moving so quickly. We did not go back and wrap up a search firm partnership. We did have a lot of conversations, but we got off the ground pretty quickly and just kind of never circled back to that, while we did talk to a lot of firms throughout the process. But I think ultimately they provide a lot of value. in the process. And I think, one of the biggest parts of it nowadays being that they can help you have conversations and do things that is not quite as out in the public as you can.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And to kind of build on that, everybody talks about, the importance of a higher integrity search. And, because obviously that's going to help broaden your candidate pool, because you may have candidates that get involved, but they don't want their name associated, to that and it getting out. So in your experience, as you talk about balancing beginning that process, and obviously there's some form of internal committee that's involved, and maybe it's a very small group, but talk about maintaining the importance of a high integrity search, especially as you work toward the end of the process where you are going to have to involve, more stakeholders in that discussion.
I think it's first maybe important to think about there's really maybe two groups and facets of the search. I think there is let's call it the facilitation group, who's having the day-to-day conversation with candidates, interviewing candidates, narrowing the pool. Then there's the approval process that is kind of a secondary process. It maybe is a different group. I don't think it's always the same group, and every school is a little bit different, obviously, in that. For example, the president may or may not be on your committee. It depends on the school you're at and what you're doing. But I think every school has a different process for how you get the approval to formally make the offer and formally offer a contract. So I think on the front end of a search, especially if you're at a new school where you've not done a search before, I think it's important to have a good lay of the land before you start of what approval is required to make that formal offer and who needs to be in the room for that final conversation to get the contract set. You don't want to be in a situation where you're ready to make an offer, ready to finalize a contract, and you skipped a procedural step that's required for you to do that. But to go back to, I guess, your question, I think the search committee, the facilitation group who's actually in the weeds day to day, having the conversations, talking to candidates, is generally a smaller group, tighter circle. I think the tighter the better. And as you said, the integrity of the search nowadays is really hard to keep intact and keep things quiet. I would tell you from my experience, it's generally a very small group that the AD puts together from the leadership team, deputy team, and maybe it involves a board member or a former player, whoever it might be. So that's the group that's having the day-to-day conversations and all the interviews. But at the same time, you're usually keeping apprised a separate group that is university leadership, president, board members, those that are going to ultimately need to have the approval for you to make the formal offer from a contract and procedural standpoint. I'll just say this too, for us in this search process this time, we kept our day-to-day interview group really small to 4 or 5 people throughout the process. We were able to keep the news of who we were hiring quiet until we were walking in the door to tell the team, actually 6 minutes before the team conversation. That's hard to do in this world that we're in from a media standpoint. So I think it finally broke after we told the coaching staffs the decision before we told the team. So John was really keen on making sure that if at all possible, we could walk in both sides of this, Coach Golish and our group, walk in and tell the team first. Usually a lofty goal that's hard to do. But I think if you keep the circle tight enough, it is feasible, but it's really challenging to do.
No, I agree with everything Rhett said. And so much of it depends on each institution and the different type of search in terms of how many people are watching. I've had this role at 3 different institutions, and each one is a little bit different. How much does the president want to be involved? How much is the board involved? Different donors. I've been fortunate in all these cases that most of the time it's a small group. It's AD and potentially, it's AD, deputy AD, that type of small group, and it's defined at the start. And what Rhett talks about too, about knowing what has to happen, being prepared so that some of those basic fundamentals occur smoothly is important. And I think as you get towards the end and you add all those people, that's where for no other reason. And then it can often happen that the place where you're hiring from, they need to know because they've got to start a search because of the domino, and that may start different things. So it changes each place. I have worked at an institution where people charted me coming in and out of a building as searches went on, and others it's not. So how you manage that process is different each place.
So in addition
our plane was actively being tracked this year.
Yeah.
We were seeing on social media that our plane was being tracked in different cities. The funniest one, though, was when there was a rampant social media thread out there, but we were all sitting in the office. We were not anywhere. It was a recruiting visit. So,
did you ever put it up in the air to send off the scent a little bit?
We should. It was on the road enough recruiting that it threw people off, but they were tracking us. Reid, every step of the way. This one.
No, that's there were a couple times this search that media members reached out to our communication staff and they said, well, I don't think that's accurate because Reid's sitting in his office. That's but
that one's pretty tough to dispute. So to add to that, in a broad sense, kind of what's the normal timeline as far as when you go from dealing with whether it's the firm agents, basically dealing on someone on behalf of the coach to really starting to ramp up those actual discussions from, on a Zoom, a call, to when you really start nailing in of we're either going to come to you or set up a meeting somewhere?
Again, I think it depends on the search, depends on the firm and how you set it up. In this particular case this year, the firm helped work out all those logistics. I mean, we went from Zoom calls, a couple of different levels of Zoom calls, then to in person. Some people go directly to in person. Some coaches were different. And so you're trying to manage all of those logistics. Again, in our case, the firm was able to do all that. In cases where you're not using a firm, then you're managing that process. But the agents are very crucial in that, and getting the timing so that you arrive at exactly the right time and you leave when you're supposed to leave, and all of those type of details. So that because as you're going to communities that the person you're talking to may or may not be a prominent part of the community. It may be a small town. How do you give as much and to protect? Again, not only are you protecting your search, you're protecting the people that are involved in the search. That how you want to be very cognizant of that as well.
Sure.
I think too. I mean, it's so interesting now with how early in season these things are happening right now, with really forced by the signing day timeline. But so much of the schedule is dictated by the coaches themselves, because you have coaches who are obviously in season, but to Reid's point, you're trying to protect both yourself and your team that's currently playing a season. Especially if you have an interim coach being considered like we did this process. So you're trying to protect your process and that you have your current team, but also the coach who you're going to see. We had a number of in-persons this year where we're pulling up to the house in the garage and closing the garage. I mean, to try to protect both sides of the house on this. Right. But so much of that from a timing standpoint, I think, is dictated by the coaches themselves and their individual schedules and who they're playing.
Yeah, that leads me right kind of to my next question on balance and timing. Like we've talked about a couple of times now. I mean, as both of these searches are going on, you're interviewing candidates that are actively, coaching football games. So as you navigate that, how do you balance being respectful of that coach and what they've got going on in their season? Obviously, it's likely that they're very successful. I mean, that's why they're a candidate for your job. But also making sure that you're getting the questions answered and the box checks that you need, because you've got a duty to your institution, your school, to make sure you're hiring the right person. We just talk a little bit about that balance.
Kind of like we just said a little bit ago, that these things are happening earlier than they really ever have right now, and so that's really changed a lot of the process, I think, from maybe what's been the case. And if you look 5 years ago to where we are now. But I mean, you can't afford right now, if you're trying to get the best pool for your job, to wait. I mean, you have to jump in, get the process going. If you're trying to set your team up for the best chance at roster retention and the signing class you're trying to sign 4 days later, in this case, from the end of your regular season. For us too, this may be old school in some people's minds, but we were very keen on making sure that every every AD of a current coach we're talking to was informed ahead of time. So we had those conversations on the front end of respect to the school that they were currently at in their teams, being that we are mid-season when these conversations are happening. So we did talk to each athletic director at the school before we actually engage with their coach directly. But, all of that is really dictated by the coaches, to answer your question, Braxton. I mean, you're trying to balance their schedule, their practice schedule. If there's a bye week coming up, that's obviously very advantageous to you. If not, you're dealing with an off day or very late at night. I mean, we had a number, probably you too, Reid, very late or very early Zooms. And so, I think, in years past, you could go to a central place, bring everybody to you, knock them out. You really can't do that right now in the world we're in. So much has changed. And to Reid's point from earlier, you're doing a ton of work on Zoom conversations, 1 or 2 rounds of Zoom before you ever have an in-person conversation. And with the nature of where you are in the season, you can't always see every coach in person realistically. Like sometimes it's not just possible to see the coach in person from a confidentiality standpoint of the point Reid made of the town they might live in, how visible that would be, or just from a schedule standpoint of the schedule that coaches practice that week. So much of it now, thankfully, it can be done via Zoom to have those conversations, even if they are very long, in-depth Zoom conversations.
No, Rhett outlined it well. It's really what is that coach comfortable with, and that has been a change for coaches too, because for years it was I'm not going to speak until the end of the season, and now we've reached a point where that's not feasible, and you feel, it's not something any of us are happy about by any stretch, and you want to be able to, and if you interview a coach during that week, you're hoping they win, partly because you don't want to have any of the guilt that they may have been distracted or those type things. And so I think all the coaches did a great job with that. And as Rhett said, you do anything you can to accommodate their schedule, and Zooms make it easier, but it is very much a balance.
Yeah. So kind of transition a little bit, and I think Reid, I'll get you to start on this one. Just, we talk about this magical list that senior administrators and ADs are supposed to have for every sport, especially a football hire, and it's talked about like it's this, you have in your desk drawer a list of candidates of if your coach ever left or you needed to make a change, that's who it would be. Let's hone in on that a little bit and talk through, obviously you're watching from afar. We're all fans of the sport that we work in and the industry. So you're naturally seeing other people be successful other places. But how have you kind of navigated that in the past?
No, it's a great question. I think I try to at least you're cognizant and aware of where your coaches are and their tenure and all those things. And so you've got an idea. I do try to keep something written just so I've got an idea, and I've tried to update it each year because, if you've got a good list, most of the time everybody on that list in a year is going to, it's going to change. I mean, and everybody's lists look similar at the start, so to speak. I think for other sports too, I would task all of our sport administrators to kind of keep an idea, be aware. As Rhett talked about, you're at a different time and different points, you're going to be looking for different things. And so are you looking for an assistant coach that's ready to make that next step as a head coach? Are you looking for a sitting head coach? Each different program. Are you, we had a women's basketball search when I was at Tennessee. Well, the women's basketball position at Tennessee after Coach Summit is that may be the most prominent head coach position within that sport. And so, how do you view that? And is it different than others? But you should definitely be aware. And if you need to quickly create a list, I don't know that anybody's list is necessarily going to look that much different at a certain level, but then you are going to hone in on what do we need at this time for this particular opening. And that may change. Now, in some of your other sports, you may be looking very much more specifically, and then it is going to look a lot different. But, constantly being aware. And then again, as we talked about, search firms also they're going to have lists that they're looking at, and they're going to be aware of who the up and coming assistant coach is and those type of things.
Yeah, I think from what I think Reid just covered, the great perspective of it there. I think generally you're able to generally be prepared for that, and you have a runway to start actually fine tuning your list before search is going to happen, outside of the rare termination for calls kind of situation. But I think generally speaking, you've got a solid runway that you at least are preparing behind the scenes for. And I think other group too is the agents are going to be able to tell you a good bit about what the market is going to look like that year in terms of who's actually movable, who's not movable, and they're going to pitch their candidates to you to give you an idea of who would be good conversations as well.
Sure. We'll talk a little bit about that networking piece. You both have attended Cal's for a while now, and what Will and his team have put together. And obviously there's a lot of great lessons to learn at Cal's. And you talk about, from a professional growth standpoint, and the network that you've built over the years, how do you lean on that when you're navigating this? Is it as much as simple as how do I get a hold of Coach X, Y, and Z, as to your point, Rhett, of, somebody that is somebody and trust, and you want to give that AD or that administrator a heads up of what you're walking into?
Yeah, I think it's all relationships at its core. Look, there's no perfect candidate or perfect job out there. Every job or candidate, you need to really dive in and understand every aspect of it. And I think in a search, when you're trying to get it right, you're going to lean as much as you can on colleagues and mentors around the industry who you trust. But we had a ton of conversations this cycle with people around the industry about different candidates, because there are things, especially when you're going through a world where it's so heavily Zoom-based, it is really hard to truly understand that candidate, to try to delineate or try to narrow your pool down. And so, we had a lot of conversations, and being able to pick up the phone with people you've built relationships with at Cal's or wherever else, you are, and meeting them is important, because that's how you get the true, honest perspective that you need in a search process. If you're trying to call the people who the coach told you to call, you're not going to get the true perspective. So I think it all comes down to relationships you've built at these events, people you can know, you can trust. They're going to have your best interest at heart in the conversations.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's who are you comfortable calling in those moments that you need that type of counsel, and part of it is understanding that everybody's going through it. That we've all been through it, and there's good searches and bad searches, and in terms of going through the process, and it's that understanding and any insights that they may have. In terms of calling, kind of reference calls, you're balancing that. You want to know, hey, is this as good as I think it is, or is this something I need to be aware of? Those types of things. And it's best if you can, to have those beforehand, so that you're not doing it in the middle, but that doesn't always work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue kind of into our next point. And, talk a little bit, Reid, you have hired, coaches at a high level. You've been involved in multiple football searches. Rhett, I know you've been involved in some high level coaching searches as well before this one this past year. How do you lean on your past experience of, hey, my gut is telling me we need to be doing X, Y, and Z. We need to be looking at this candidate, talking to this person, versus kind of what you're hearing in the here and now of, hey, this is potentially the hot name. I don't know anything about this person, but we need to dig in and explore this.
No, it's a great question. And I think you also learn from when things don't go well. That can oftentimes be the most telling. We've all been through some challenging searches. You hope they don't play out on ESPN or CNN or other places. But I think it's sticking to your plan, going through the plan. What is it and the word alignment gets overused sometimes, but knowing that everybody's on the same page as much as possible, that your board, your president, the chancellor, if that's the case, that everybody's on the same page, that when you get to that point, as Rhett talked about, where you've got to make that decision, that everybody is there and ready to go. It's an interesting question. I mean, I think, sometimes it's the feeling of this is not the right fit. and being able to say that. It's not necessarily that I think this is going to be the right person at the right moment. It's you feel like this is the best decision at this point, at this time. My experience is I often feel like more, hey, this one is not, this is not going to work for us at this point.
Sure.
And sometimes your programs are in a different spot. You may have a program that has historically been great and they've come down and you need more energy, or you need all of those different things, and you're never going to fully feel it. But on my side, I think I feel more of this is not necessarily the exact right fit for no other reason than it just may not be the right one. And I think it's speaking to that and having the trust in the person you're working with to say, hey, I think we need to go in a different direction, or this is where I feel strongly. Because you may have a search where everybody thinks that's the exact perfect, and it may not turn out. And then you may have others where, it's the person's a little bit down the list and they may go on and win a national championship. So you're not ever going to know exactly in those moments.
No guarantees.
Right. And that particular search, I was involved in the baseball search at Tennessee there was a moment where John made one of those decisions to walk away, and the candidate we ended up with turned out to be fairly successsul. So
it worked out okay, Reid.
Yeah,
I think he might have just taken a job in pro ball. That's
right. But you don't know. But that was, he made that decision in that moment, and that was the right decision.
To what Reid just said there, Brax, the only thing I'll add with that is, I think one thing to keep in mind too, with the way we move to different schools in different roles, like what works at one school in a search or what you're looking for is not always the same. You have to truly understand the place you're at in that situation. Like from our standpoint, what we were looking for, or the way we did a search at Mississippi State is not the same as we did at Auburn. Looking for different kinds of candidates, different perspectives here. But I think also that in terms of looking at past experiences to now, things have changed so much in such a short period of time. Like, I don't think Reid, either one of us would have expected 5 years ago for the first question we all got asked in interviews this year from a coach to be, what does your revenue share NIL commitment look like? I mean, it's a totally different world, and the conversations you're having right now, while you try to lean on past experiences, it's not always possible because the world is evolving so quickly right now in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. One more kind of big picture one, and then we'll get into a couple of fun questions to wrap it up. But from my standpoint, and I've been fortunate, thankful to you both, and to be a little bit involved in some of these conversations, especially as we get down to the end. But I think sometimes searches are hard, especially for those that are coming up, in that you're not necessarily involved until you're all the way involved. And it's tough to a little bit prepare yourself and know what you're walking into until you're in one and you walk through it. So if you wouldn't mind, you guys just kind of share a little bit what you would tell somebody that is maybe not been involved in a search, but hopes to be, part of that process someday, on, how you could potentially prepare yourself. And then maybe something that once you went through your first search, you were like, whoa, I wasn't prepared for that. I wish I would have known X, Y, and Z.
I'll say this, Braxton, what I've found throughout my past is after a search is over, once things settle down, most people who are part of these searches would share perspective with you of what happens and what the process is like. But you have to go seek that out. They're not going to generally just offer it up and say, hey, let's sit and talk about this. They might if you have a really strong relationship from a mentorship standpoint. But, I would say I would encourage people who were interested by the process, for mentors that have gone through it, to ask direct questions about it and try to get experience from their process. That said as well, though, I think, for that kind of conversation, especially with depending on what level of information you're wanting to get out of it, you never have a relationship with that person. This can't be your first conversation you're scheduling via email with somebody to get to know somebody about a football coaching search. But I think if you seek out that conversation and have a genuine interest to learn, I think you're going to get what you're wanting to get out of that conversation. I'll also say, it's hard to get experience in a football search until you're in it. But there are plenty of other searches around the department that if you ask, you're going to have the opportunity to be a part of. So sometimes you have to learn through other sport experiences to be ready for the football opportunity.
Sure.
No, I think that's great advice. I think it just depends too on how, I was at Kansas State for 4 years and we had one head coach search in 4 years. I was at Tennessee and in my first year we had 5, and so it just depends, here at Oklahoma State, I've been here 4 years and we've had 5. So sometimes it's just when is that opportunity? I do think, the thing that people, and it's interesting, even I'm sure Rhett has experienced this over the last couple of weeks. Everybody sees, oh, your search is complete. Congratulations. Now you can take a rest. Well, now the hard part starts. I mean, now you've got the transition of there are 40 to 50 people that, may be losing their jobs, and 40 or 50 people in, and all the logistics involved with that, and having a plan. And we put together, and Brakston, you helped lead this. We had a transition group that worked on all the logistics of what information are we providing, where are we going to provide hotels, what's our temporary housing, how are we going to get our general counsel, how are we going to get the contract templates, all of those things. And then the introduction, where can we help, all of the logistics. I think it's being prepared that can help. And then, as Rhett said, is asking those direct questions that you can, learn about the process. But part of it is, like you say, going through it that first time and understanding, and just as much as possible having a plan. I think the other thing that can help is, again, the most important ability is availability. Sometimes that's a huge part of this, that you need people just to do A or B or C. The other thing you can't prepare for, when here at Oklahoma State, we went through a men's basketball search. We completed it, and literally that day, our head wrestling coach, who'd been the wrestling coach for 33 years, walked into the AD's office to say he was retiring. And, depending again on different places, at Oklahoma State, the wrestling search is a huge, huge deal. And, how do you prepare for that? And so it's just, again, being around and understanding that it's all part of the process. And I think that's the thing I've learned over the time is, you think, all right, there's this finish line, and there really isn't. That's when, again, the whole process, and you've got to be ready to work through all of that, because at that point, the most important thing is setting up your coach that you've just hired for success. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to have him interact with the right donors and make the right phone calls and do the right PR things and all of those things that really has to be your focus.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about some of those logistics. So we talked earlier a little bit on private flights and tracking planes and all those things. And I know it sounds like obviously the agents and the search firms are involved in that, but talk a little bit about navigating the logistics of the early. I know we've hit on that, a lot of this is conducted via Zoom, but I know there's an in-person component to it. And maybe without getting into specifics, give a little bit of a anecdotal, your craziest logistic travel story. Maybe not from this search, but from one you've been through.
No, again, it's everybody between the agents and the search firms. It can all work out. I do not have a story of a 2 a.m. meeting. I do think Zoom has helped with some of that. I have had some early mornings. Those type things. It is something real you've got to experience, especially if you live in a community. Well, it really is everywhere. The way FlightAware works is, are you going to depart from your home community? Are you going to drive somewhere else? But always being cognizant. Are you going, are there certain places, and Rhett talked about it, I've done basketball and volleyball searches where if the timing works, which it doesn't anymore, but in the past, you could go to the Final Four site and everybody was there. And so you got a hotel suite and it worked great. Well, now that the timing is such, and the transfer portal, that even that doesn't necessarily work. So we do joke about the flight aware, but being cognizant of it. And again, do you fly out from somewhere else? Do you drive to a larger city and get on a commercial flight? All of those type things you've got to work through.
Yeah.
I'll give you a story from this cycle, Braxton. So like I said, we moved pretty quickly in the search. We were in a really good spot. A couple weeks in, I had a vacation that's been scheduled for over a year, actually going to Disney World, and of all places. And we were in a pretty good spot in the search, and I was not going to go, but John, our AD, and others encouraged me to go. Another guy in our group had a trip planned the same weekend too. It was actually our bye week, so went on the trip and thought everything was in a great spot. I'm actually with this large group. We're at the Magic Kingdom on a Friday night for an event for that night at the park. And I get a message from our chief of staff that says, "Hey, we're going to have a Zoom in 30 minutes with a candidate." Well, if you know anything about Magic Kingdom, where you are, getting back to your hotel in a guaranteed 30 minutes is probably not going to happen. And so took my cell phone to the second floor of a restaurant in the Magic Kingdom, put my AirPods in, took a Zoom interview with a coach live from the Magic Kingdom during fireworks late on a Friday night in the middle of this trip. So I would tell you, in a search, while you think everything is timed perfectly, prepare for the unexpected.
Whatever it takes, even if it's a Zoom in Magic Kingdom. Love it. Well, we'll kind of wrap up. Again, thank you guys. Appreciate the time. Talk real quickly just on, you guys, like I talked about at the beginning, you completed your searches. You both, I know, hired candidates that you feel really good about. Talk a little bit about individually how Eric Morris and Alex Golish are the right fit for your school in the right time, and what you're excited about there.
Now, I think we talk about fit, and sometimes that can be oversaid. We have a great fit here. Eric, not only from he's been a Power 5 coordinator, has also been a head coach at 2 different levels, ready to make that next step. Runs an exciting offense, has coached and recruited Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, Cam Ward, just a series of quarterbacks and offense, which matches kind of the history of what Coach Gundy built in 20 years, kind of that incredible offense and exciting games. So it fit from that. He's talked about he wants to raise his children in a small town, and to have, for him, ideally, to have a small town with a Power 4 college football is the ideal for he and his family. Has incredibly strong connection to Texas and Oklahoma from a recruiting standpoint. So kind of really did check all of those boxes. Not only somebody that we very much wanted, but also that he wanted to be part of. He's talked about he either played or coached here multiple times and has seen Boone Pickens Stadium when it was electric. He's talked about the fact that as a visitor, he's never won, and he wants to be part of that on the home team. And so all of those things really lined up to make it work.
Yeah, for us, Alex Golish was high on our list at the very beginning before we even started the search. One of the first candidates we talked to in the process. For us, as we looked at the search and started the process, from the very beginning, the whole conversation for us was about finding someone who fits Auburn football. Reid talked about fit, how important that is. And for us, we took a hard look at when Auburn football has been at its best, what are the characteristics of those kind of coaches? And it's a blue-collar, grinded-out, outwork you mentality that translates from the coach to the team on the field. And if you don't know much about Alex Golish, that is who he is. He has the outwork you mentality. I remember in our first interview with him, one of the things he said that I wrote down was, I can assure you there's going to be no one who's ever going to outwork me or my staff in college football. And it was believable when he said it. He said it with such passion. And then you hear his story. And if you don't know his story, he's a self-made man. He and his parents moved to the U.S. when he was 8 years old from Russia. with 2 bags, $400 cash, and nobody spoke English. And he moved to the U.S. and found his love for football. Parents worked hard to make a living for his family. And he fell in love with the game of football from watching it on TV when he moved to the U.S. and wanted to be a part of it. And he has that outwork you mentality we were looking for. John, in the presser, when we announced the coaching change, John said the word edge, I think, 14 times because he wanted a coach that had edge and that could instill the toughness, the grit back in the Auburn football program from that standpoint. And it was apparent to us that Alex Golesh had the edge. But he'd also created prolific offenses everywhere he's been. If you look at his offenses at Tennessee, at UCF, at USF, he inherited a football team at USF that the 3 years prior to his arrival had won a combined 4 games. And he put up 23 wins in his 3 seasons after, including 7 wins in his first year there after a 1-11 season the year prior. So he just wins. And so for us, it was finding somebody that was a winner, who had that edge, that tenacity, and who wanted to be at Auburn and wanted to lead the program, understood what the program what was and what the fan base deserves.
That's awesome. Well, again, guys, congratulations on 2 high-level searches. As Reid and Rhett both mentioned, this is the work now begins. Now the hard part starts. But appreciate you guys answering those questions and kind of going through it. It was very helpful for me. I hope it was helpful for those listening. And like both these guys said, ask people that you're close with and have mentored you through your career. It's the best way you're gonna learn and grow. Grateful for both of you guys. Appreciate the time. And this has been the lobby portion of the Cows Report podcast.
That's it for episode 16 of the Cows Report. Our thanks to Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports for his insight on the issues shaping college football today. Thanks as well to Reid Sigmon, Deputy Athletic Director at Oklahoma State, and Rhett Hobart, Deputy Athletic Director at Auburn, for sharing their perspective on the head football coach hiring process. And a special thanks to Brakston Brock for leading the conversation in the lobby. You can find the Cows Report on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media at AD Symposium on X and at the Cows Report on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can also visit us anytime at adsymposium.us. There you'll find event details and more content from across the Cows community. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep leading the way in college athletics.